The Vampire King's fiancé buried his daughter alive, but the maid's miracle exposed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's tale. The night was thick with tension, the kind that only comes when secrets are buried deep beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to resurface. In the opulent mansion of the Vampire King, the air was heavy with the weight of unspoken words. His fiancée, the woman he had once trusted above all others, was far from the delicate, loving partner he had believed her to be. No, she was a woman of dark ambition, driven by jealousy and power. For years, she had lived in the shadows of the Vampire King's affection, always measuring herself against his daughter, a young girl who had the king's heart and the future of the throne in her hands. That night, the fiancé's jealousy reached its peak. She had planned this for months, every detail carefully thought out, every step calculated. She waited for the moment when the Vampire King would be absent, as he often was, leaving his daughter vulnerable. The fiancée made her move. Her actions were swift, ruthless, and driven by a twisted desire for control. She led the girl to a secluded part of the mansion, a place few ever entered. It was there, in the cold and darkened chambers, that she made her horrifying decision. She buried the girl alive. No one would find her, no one would suspect a thing. The fiancée stood over the fresh grave, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. It was done. She believed no one would ever know. But she was wrong. Unbeknownst to the fiancé, there was someone who had seen everything. Someone who would change the course of fate. Maid, a quiet, unassuming woman, worked in the shadows of the grand estate, cleaning the spaces where others rarely ventured. She had seen the fiancé lead the young girl away, had heard the muffled sounds of distress, but had never dared to question. That is, until now. Maid had always been just a servant, her life defined by obedience and silence. But in that moment, something inside her stirred. The image of the innocent child, trapped and fighting for breath, haunted her. Maid knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. As the night wore on, Maid slipped away from her duties, following the faint trail of disturbed earth to the hidden spot where the girl had been left to die. Her heart pounded in her chest as she dug through the dirt with trembling hands. And then, against all odds, her fingers brushed against something soft and warm. There, beneath the earth, the girl still lived. Maid's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe it, but there was no time to waste. The girl was still alive. As she pulled the girl from the grave, Maid knew that this was just the beginning. There was no turning back now. Maid had defied the powerful fiancé, and now she would have to face the consequences of her actions. But what could a simple maid do against the wrath of the Vampire King's fiancé? Little did she know, she had just set into motion a series of events that would change everything. The heavy storm outside raged on, but inside the mansion, there was an eerie stillness. Maid moved quickly, her breath shallow and frantic as she rushed through the dimly lit halls, carrying the young girl who had been buried alive just moments ago. Her heart was racing, and her mind was filled with dread. She had saved the girl, but now what would she do? The fiancé would stop at nothing to cover up her crime, and the Vampire King, though powerful, had no idea what had truly happened. Maid's pulse quickened with every step, the weight of the girl in her arms a constant reminder of the danger they were in. She had to keep her safe, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, and time was running out. The girl's face, pale and lifeless just moments before, was now showing signs of life. Her skin had a faint warmth to it, and her breaths were slow but steady. Maid was amazed. She had never expected to find the girl alive, much less have her breathing again. But she had. And now, the real challenge began. Maid knew she couldn't hide forever. As she moved through the mansion, her mind raced, thinking of a safe place to hide. She couldn't go back to her quarters. Too many eyes would be on her. She couldn't risk being caught. The fiancé would know. But where could she take the girl? The mansion was vast, and its many hallways and rooms felt like a labyrinth. Maid's thoughts raced, but her instincts kicked in, guiding her through the mansion as she searched for the right place. Finally, she found a small, unused chamber near the east wing, one that the staff rarely ventured into. It was dark, but there was a small cot in the corner, and Maid could hear the faint hum of a distant furnace. It would have to do. She gently laid the girl down on the cot, covering her with a tattered blanket she found in a nearby closet. For a moment, Maid just stood there, her chest heaving with the effort, her mind still reeling from the chaos of what had just happened. But she couldn't rest yet. The fiancé would surely notice the girl's disappearance soon, and when she did, the entire mansion would be on high alert. Maid's eyes flicked nervously to the door, hearing every creak and groan of the old mansion. She needed a plan. But what could she do? The vampire king would eventually return. But would he believe her if she told him the truth? Maid wasn't sure. He trusted his fiancée, perhaps more than he should. But if he knew the truth, if he knew what his fiancée had done, would he act? Maid bit her lip, pacing the small room. She had to get the girl to safety, but she had to be careful. The fiancé's wrath would be relentless, and Maid didn't want to imagine what would happen if she was caught. As she stood there, her thoughts a whirlwind, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside the room. Her heart stopped. She held her breath, praying that whoever it was would just pass by. But the steps stopped outside the door. A knock. Maid froze, panic rising in her chest. She had no idea who it could be. Was it the fiancé? Or worse, was it one of the guards? Maid's hand shook as she slowly reached for the doorknob, ready to face whatever was on the other side. The door creaked open, revealing a tall figure standing in the hallway. It was a man, but not just any man. This was one of the Vampire King's trusted generals. He was looking directly at her, his piercing eyes betraying nothing. "I've been looking for you," the general said, his voice low and dangerous. Maid swallowed hard, but she didn't say a word. The general stepped closer, his gaze flicking toward the cot where the girl lay. Maid's heart pounded in her chest. Was he here to expose her? Did he know? The general's gaze softened slightly, but it was still full of intensity. "You did well," he said quietly. Maid blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" The general's eyes met hers, his expression hardening once more. "The Vampire King knows," he said. Maid's blood ran cold. The Vampire King knew? How? What did he know? The general seemed to read the panic on her face. "Not everything, but he knows you saved her." Maid was stunned. She had no idea how the Vampire King could have known, but in that moment, the weight of everything seemed to shift. She wasn't alone in this anymore. The general nodded toward the girl on the cot. "He'll protect you both, but you need to move quickly. There's no time to waste. The fiancée is dangerous, and she won't stop until she gets what she wants." Maid's breath caught in her throat. The fiancé, the one who had done this. She would stop at nothing to cover her tracks. Maid couldn't afford to let her guard down, not even for a moment. She nodded, her resolve hardening. "Where do we go?" she asked. The general stepped aside, revealing a darkened hallway behind him. "Follow me," he said. "I'll take you to safety." Maid didn't hesitate. She grabbed the girl's hand, her heart pounding, and followed the general into the unknown. The journey had only just begun, but one thing was certain. The fiancé's reign of terror would soon come to an end. The general led them down a narrow, dimly lit hallway, the air growing colder with every step. Maid, her heart pounding in her chest, kept her eyes fixed on the back of the man ahead. Her hands were still trembling from the chaos of the past few hours, but she couldn't afford to falter now. She had the Vampire King's daughter in her care, and that made her the most important person in this twisted game. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, and every footstep echoed ominously in the silence. She could hear her breathing, the faint, labored sound of her chest rising and falling, as she followed the general. He moved with purpose, his footsteps confident and steady, but there was an edge to his demeanor that Maid couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else, an awareness of just how dangerous the world around them was. The further they walked, the more the mansion felt like a maze, a dark, endless labyrinth of stone and secrets. The flickering lights from overhead only added to the eerie atmosphere, casting long shadows along the walls. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the general stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. Without turning to look at Maid, he spoke in a low voice. "This is the safest room in the mansion. It's hidden away from the eyes of the fiancé's spies." Maid's heart skipped a beat. She had thought they were already in hiding, but this was different. It was as though they were stepping into another world entirely. "What about the girl?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The general glanced back, his eyes sharp and calculating. "She'll be safe here. For now. But you need to understand something." He opened the door slowly, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, there were old bookshelves lining the walls, filled with dusty tomes. The only piece of furniture was a simple bed, draped in dark linens. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "The fiancée is ruthless," the general continued, stepping into the room and looking back at Maid. "She will not stop. If she knows the girl is alive, she will do everything in her power to finish what she started." Maid nodded, her mind racing. She had no illusions about the fiancée's cruelty. The woman had already proven she would go to any lengths to get what she wanted. The general moved to the bed and carefully helped the girl onto it, laying her down gently. "She's strong," he said, almost to himself. "But the fiancée is a force to be reckoned with." Maid stood at the door, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The general didn't immediately answer. Instead, he moved to the bookshelf, pulling a thick, leather-bound book from one of the shelves. He flipped it open and scanned the pages for a moment before looking back at her. "We wait," he said, his voice low, "and we prepare. The Vampire King will return soon. He will know what has happened, and when he does, we will need to act quickly." Maid's breath caught in her throat. The Vampire King. Would he really come for them? Would he believe her, or would he trust his fiancée, the woman who had held his heart for so long? "Do you think he'll help us?" she asked, her voice trembling. The general met her gaze, his expression hardening. "He doesn't have a choice. His daughter is alive because of you. That means something." Maid swallowed hard, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She had no idea how this would play out, but one thing was clear. Their lives, the lives of the girl and herself, were now tied to the outcome of the Vampire King's reaction. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. The general placed the book back on the shelf and turned to face Maid fully. "You've done something extraordinary. You saved her when no one else could. But the road ahead is dangerous, and it will only get more dangerous." Maid nodded again, her resolve hardening. "I won't let her down," she said, her voice stronger now. "I will protect her." The general's eyes softened for a brief moment, but then he nodded in approval. "Good. Because if we fail now, it's not just your life at stake. It's the life of the Vampire King's daughter and the balance of power in this entire world." Maid took a deep breath, her mind already turning over the possibilities, the risks, the choices that lay ahead. She had never imagined that she would be in this position, caught between two powerful forces, both dangerous and relentless. But she couldn't back down now. The girl's life depended on her, and Maid would do whatever it took to ensure she survived. The fiancé's wrath would be relentless, but with the Vampire King's return, a new chapter was about to begin. The general stepped toward the door, pausing for just a moment before speaking again. "The fiancée will not give up, but neither will we. Stay vigilant." And with that, he disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, leaving Maid alone with the girl. The silence in the room was deafening, but Maid didn't feel alone. Not anymore. She had a purpose now, and she would protect this girl, no matter the cost. The hours passed slowly in the dimly lit room, each minute stretching longer than the last. Maid sat on a small wooden chair beside the bed where the girl lay, her breathing soft but steady. The storm outside had calmed, but the tension in the air inside the mansion was thick enough to cut with a knife. The general had left her in the small, secluded room, and now, all she could do was wait. But wait for what? The Vampire King's return? Or the inevitable confrontation with his fiancée? Maid's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She had done the right thing. She knew that, but the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. Maid looked down at the girl, her heart heavy. The child's skin had warmed since they arrived here, but she still looked so fragile. Her eyes remained closed, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. How much longer would she have to hide here? Would they ever be safe? Maid felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she also felt something else, something she hadn't expected. Hope. She wasn't sure where it had come from, but the more she sat there with the girl, the more she realized how much she was willing to risk to protect her. She would not fail. But the question was, how much time did they have before the fiancée made her next move? The door creaked open, and Maid jumped to her feet, her heart racing once more. She spun around to see the general standing in the doorway, his expression grim. "We need to move," he said, his voice low but urgent. Maid's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? Where will we go?" The general stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "The fiancée is preparing for her next move," he said, his tone deadly serious. "She knows the girl is alive, and she's not going to stop until she has her. We can't wait any longer." Maid's heart sank. She had feared this moment, the moment when they would have to make their move. The fiancée's power was immense, and the general's words confirmed her worst fears. "Where are we going?" Maid asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The general looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "We're going to the Vampire King," he said finally. Maid froze. "The Vampire King?" she repeated, disbelief creeping into her voice. "But what if he doesn't believe me? What if he's been manipulated by his fiancée?" The general's eyes softened for a moment, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saved his daughter," he said simply. "That counts for something. He will listen." Maid's mind was reeling. She had never imagined herself in this position, standing at the precipice of something so enormous, so dangerous. But the general was right. She had no choice but to trust him. She had to take the chance. "Let's go," Maid said, her voice firm now, though her heart was still heavy with fear. The general nodded, and they both turned to the girl. Maid gently shook her awake, her heart pounding as the girl's eyes fluttered open. "We're going to get you to safety," Maid whispered, brushing a lock of hair from the girl's forehead. The girl blinked, confused but trusting. She didn't know what was going on, and Maid didn't have time to explain. The general led the way, and Maid followed closely behind, holding the girl's hand tightly. They moved through the dark, winding halls of the mansion, the shadows seeming to shift and stretch around them. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound in the distance, made Maid's heart race. The mansion felt like a prison, a labyrinth of secrets and lies, but the general knew the way. They reached a hidden staircase that led down into the bowels of the mansion, where the air was colder and the walls seemed to close in on them. Maid felt a chill run down her spine. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The general glanced back at her. "To the Vampire King's private chambers. It's the only place he can be sure no one will overhear us." They descended into the depths of the mansion, the stairs creaking under their weight. Maid could feel the tension in the air, could feel the weight of the danger pressing down on them. If they were caught now, it would be over. But they couldn't turn back. Not now. They reached the bottom of the stairs, and the general stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. He knocked 3 times, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to echo through the stillness. There was no answer. Maid's stomach twisted with anxiety. "What if he's not there?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The general gave her a reassuring look, though his own face was taut with concern. "He's there," he said. The door creaked open, and Maid stepped into the room. It was vast, the walls lined with shelves of ancient books and artifacts. At the far end of the room, the Vampire King sat in a chair, his back to them. His presence filled the room, and Maid could feel the power radiating off him, even from this distance. "Your Majesty," the general said, bowing low. The Vampire King turned slowly, his piercing eyes meeting Maid's gaze. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his expression that made Maid's heart race. "You've brought her," he said, his voice like ice. Maid's throat tightened, but she stepped forward. "She's alive, Your Majesty. She was buried alive by your fiancé." The Vampire King's eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to grow colder. Maid could see the anger flickering in his gaze, but she couldn't tell what he was thinking. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Maid swallowed, her mind racing. This was it. She had to make him believe. "Because I saved her. Because I'm the one who found her and kept her alive." There was a long silence, and Maid held her breath. The Vampire King stared at her, his gaze unwavering. Then, finally, he stood, his tall form casting a shadow over the room. "Then we have much to discuss." The Vampire King stood tall before Maid, his piercing gaze never leaving her as she nervously shifted her weight. The room had gone cold, and the atmosphere thickened with tension. The Vampire King's deep, dark presence seemed to fill every corner, making it difficult to breathe. His silence was oppressive, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. Maid's heart raced, but she knew she couldn't show fear. Not now. Not when the girl's life hung in the balance. You say my fiancé buried my daughter alive. The Vampire King's voice finally broke the silence, his words cutting through the air like a blade. Why should I believe this? Why should I trust you? Maid's throat tightened as she struggled to find the right words. The weight of his distrust was suffocating, but she had no choice but to continue. Because I'm the one who saved her, Maid replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. I found her in time. I kept her alive when no one else could. The fiancé did this, and I know it. You have to believe me. The Vampire King stared at her, his eyes unreadable. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. You saved her? He repeated, his tone skeptical. Maid nodded, taking a deep breath. Yes, Your Majesty. I didn't think it was possible at first, but she was still breathing. The fiancé thought she was dead. She buried her, thinking no one would find her. But I did. She paused, her heart pounding in her chest. And now, I'm asking you to help her. She's not just the future of your bloodline. She's your daughter. Your fiancé won't stop. She'll do whatever it takes to silence her. The Vampire King's expression remained stoic, but his jaw clenched, and Maid could feel the anger rising within him. His gaze shifted toward the bed, where the girl lay motionless, a small figure under the blanket. Maid watched his face closely, searching for any hint of emotion. Finally, the Vampire King sighed, his breath heavy with frustration and disbelief. This is too much. How could I not have seen it? He muttered, almost to himself. How could I have trusted her so blindly? Maid's heart ached as she watched the Vampire King struggle with the betrayal. She could see the weight of the situation sinking in, the crushing realization that his fiancée had deceived him so thoroughly. You were manipulated, Maid said softly, stepping closer to him. She's been playing both of us from the beginning. She wanted power, and she knew that eliminating your daughter was the only way to get it. You were blinded by your trust in her. But now, you have a chance to make it right. The Vampire King turned to her, his eyes flashing with something like fury. Make it right. His voice was cold, filled with bitterness. How do I make this right? After everything that's happened, after everything she's done, can it ever be right again? Maid's stomach tightened. She knew this wasn't just about the girl anymore. This was about the Vampire King's shattered trust and his realization of how far his fiancée had gone. He was grappling with the truth, but would he accept it? Maid took a step back, giving him space to breathe. We can't undo the past, Your Majesty, she said softly. But we can stop her. You can stop her. It's not too late. Your daughter is alive. You can protect her, and we can bring justice. The Vampire King's gaze softened for a moment, and Maid saw the flicker of determination in his eyes. Justice, he repeated, almost as if tasting the word. He looked down at the girl, his daughter, lying in the bed, pale and fragile. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by something else, something deeper. I failed her, he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. I failed both of them, but no more. I won't let her get away with this. I won't let her destroy what's left of my family. Maid nodded, a sense of relief flooding through her. The Vampire King was no longer the man who had been blinded by love for his fiancée. He had seen the truth. Now, he was ready to fight. Thank you, Maid whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you for believing me. The Vampire King's gaze hardened once more, his eyes now focused with deadly determination. This ends tonight, he said, his voice low and commanding. I will confront her. I will make her pay for what she's done. No one harms my family and gets away with it. Maid stepped back, her heart racing. This was it. The moment of reckoning. The fiancée would finally be held accountable for her actions. The Vampire King was ready to take back control. But as Maid turned to look at the girl, she couldn't help but wonder, would it be enough? Would the Vampire King's anger be enough to stop his fiancée, or would the battle for his family's future cost them everything? Maid could only wait and pray that they were ready for what came next. The Vampire King's fury was palpable as he stormed out of the room, his footsteps echoing in the vast hallways of the mansion. Maid, still shaken from the intense confrontation, stood by the door, her heart pounding. She had done what she needed to do, but now everything depended on the Vampire King's next move. Would he really confront his fiancée? Would he finally see the truth? She could only hope. As she turned back to the girl lying on the cot, Maid felt a surge of protectiveness. The young girl was still fragile, her pale face drawn with exhaustion, but her breath was steady. She had survived the impossible once, but Maid knew the true battle had only just begun. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind her. "You're still here." The general's voice was low, his tone tinged with concern. Maid turned, her heart lifting a little at the sight of him. He was the one person who had kept his word, guiding her through the madness. "Yes," Maid replied quietly, not taking her eyes off the girl. "I'm not going anywhere. She needs me." The general stepped closer, his eyes flicking toward the girl. "The Vampire King has left to face his fiancée," he said. "He will do what's necessary, but you need to prepare. She won't let this go easily." Maid nodded, her grip tightening on the edge of the cot. She couldn't stop now, not when so much was at stake. "What if he doesn't win?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The general gave her a hard look. "Then you make sure she survives. That's all you need to focus on now. When the Vampire King returns, he'll bring justice. But you must protect her in the meantime. Don't let your guard down." Maid swallowed, her stomach clenching. She knew the general was right. The fiancée would not go down without a fight, and the mansion was full of people loyal to her. "I won't let anything happen to her," Maid said, her voice firm. "I promise." The general nodded, then turned to leave. "I'll make sure the way is clear for you. Don't trust anyone else in this house. And keep the girl hidden." Maid watched him go, her mind swirling with doubt and determination. Could she really protect the girl? Could she keep her safe long enough for the Vampire King to make his move? She didn't know, but she couldn't back down now. She had come too far. As the hours passed, the mansion remained eerily quiet. Maid kept her vigil by the girl's side, her eyes darting to the door at every sound. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, that the fiancé was closing in. And then, as the moon rose high in the sky, the silence was broken by a knock at the door. Maid's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? She hesitated, but then the voice called from the other side. "Maid, open the door." It was the Vampire King's voice. Maid's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped, prayed, that he would return, but she had never imagined it would be like this. He was here, and that meant everything was about to change. She rushed to the door, throwing it open to reveal the Vampire King standing there, his face hard, but his eyes filled with something different now. Something like relief. "You're safe," he said quietly. Maid nodded, her heart still racing. "We're safe, for now." The Vampire King stepped into the room, his gaze flicking to the girl lying in the bed. His eyes softened as he took in the sight of her, his daughter, still unconscious but alive. Maid could see the pain in his expression, the grief that came with the realization of what had almost happened to her. "I failed her," the Vampire King said, his voice low, the weight of the words pressing heavily on him. "I should have protected her. I should have seen it." Maid stepped forward, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You couldn't have known," she said softly. "None of us could have. But she's here now. She's alive, and we have a chance to fix this." The Vampire King looked at her, his eyes filled with something new, resolve. "You're right," he said. "And I won't let my fiancée destroy my family. I won't let her tear us apart." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "It ends tonight." Maid nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of fear and hope. She had always believed in him, but now she was seeing the true power of the Vampire King's resolve. He would stop at nothing to protect his daughter, and to bring the fiancé to justice. "What do we do now?" Maid asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King looked at her with a cold, calculating expression. "We fight. We take back what's mine." He turned to the girl, his gaze softening for a moment. "And we make sure she never has to fear again." Maid watched as the Vampire King moved to the bed, gently brushing a lock of hair from the girl's forehead. It was a moment of tenderness, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the crown. But then, his expression hardened again, and he looked up at Maid. "Prepare yourself. The fiancé is dangerous, and we need to be ready for anything." Maid nodded, steeling herself for what was to come. The time for hiding was over. The time for action was now. And with the Vampire King at her side, she knew they had a chance. A chance to end this nightmare, once and for all. The tension in the air was palpable as the Vampire King and Maid made their way down the cold, silent corridors of the mansion. Each step they took felt like it echoed through the halls, reverberating off the walls that had witnessed so much deceit and betrayal. The time had come to confront the fiancé, to put an end to the lies and the threats that had been brewing beneath the surface for far too long. The Vampire King's resolve was unshakable now, but the weight of the task ahead bore heavily on him. He had trusted her. He had loved her. But now, she had crossed a line no one should ever cross, especially not with his daughter at stake. He could feel the darkness of the mansion closing in on him, as if the very walls were conspiring to keep him trapped in this nightmare. Yet, with each stride, his determination grew stronger. He would not let this go unanswered. Maid walked beside him, her mind racing with the gravity of the situation. She had never imagined being at the center of a conflict like this, but now, here she was, standing by the side of the most powerful being in the realm, preparing to face the woman who had buried an innocent child alive. The fiancé had no idea what was coming for her. As they approached the grand hall, the Vampire King paused, his sharp eyes scanning the room. There was no sign of the fiancé yet, but the tension was still thick. "We need to act quickly," the Vampire King muttered, his voice low but filled with authority. "The longer we wait, the more dangerous she becomes." Maid nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment they confronted the fiancé, there would be no turning back. It was either her or them. There was no other way. The Vampire King pushed open the massive doors to the hall, his presence commanding attention even before they entered. The fiancée was standing by the large window, her back to them, seemingly lost in thought. At the sound of the doors opening, she turned, her expression one of feigned surprise. "Ah, you're back," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I trust everything is in order." The Vampire King's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Maid thought she saw a flicker of something darker in his gaze. "No," he said coldly, his voice carrying through the hall like a thunderclap. "It's not in order, and it never will be again." The fiancé's smile faltered, her eyes flashing with a mix of confusion and growing anger. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone becoming sharp. "You have no idea what you've done," the Vampire King continued, his voice like ice. "You thought you could bury my daughter and get away with it. But you were wrong." Maid stepped forward, her hands shaking but her resolve as firm as steel. "You buried her alive," she said, her voice steady. "You tried to kill her, and you would have succeeded if I hadn't found her in time." The fiancé's face twisted with fury as she stepped closer, her eyes burning with hatred. "You think you can just come in here and accuse me of such a thing?" she spat. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The Vampire King's voice dropped to a whisper, but it was laced with a deadly edge. "I know exactly who you are," he said. "You're a murderer, a liar, and a traitor, and I will make sure you answer for everything." The fiancé's eyes widened in disbelief, her expression shifting from anger to something that resembled fear. But she quickly masked it, her cold composure returning. "You can't do this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're making a mistake. You don't know the whole story. I don't need to know any more of your lies." The Vampire King cut her off, his tone final. "This ends now. You are no longer welcome here." The fiancé's lips curled into a sneer, but there was a flicker of panic in her eyes. She knew she had lost, and in that moment, she realized just how much power the Vampire King had over her fate. Maid watched as the fiancé's expression shifted, her posture stiffening as she tried to retain some semblance of control. But the Vampire King was unyielding. He had seen the truth, and nothing would stop him from delivering justice. "I want her gone," the Vampire King said, turning to Maid. His voice was filled with authority, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Maid saw the full force of his power. "She will never harm my family again." Maid nodded, her throat tight with emotion. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment of reckoning. The fiancé's reign of terror was over. But as the guards moved in to escort her out of the room, the fiancé's eyes flashed with a dark promise. "You haven't won yet," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this." The Vampire King's eyes locked onto hers, his expression hard and unforgiving. "No, you will regret this," he said coldly, his words sending a chill through the room. As the fiancé was let out, Maid let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. There would be consequences for the fiancé's actions, and the Vampire King would make sure of it. Maid felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She had kept her promise. The girl was safe, and they had finally confronted the evil that had been lurking in the shadows for so long. But as the Vampire King turned to her, his expression softening, Maid knew that this was just the beginning. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with a rare vulnerability. Maid gave a small nod, her heart heavy but relieved. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "I did what was right." The Vampire King gave her a long look, his gaze filled with something she couldn't quite place. But whatever it was something she had earned. "No," he said finally, his voice steady. "You did more than that. You saved my daughter. And for that, you will always have my gratitude." Maid met his gaze, her heart swelling with emotion. She had done what she never thought possible, and in doing so, she had become part of a world she had never imagined. And with the Vampire King by her side, she knew that no matter what happened next, they would face it together. The mansion felt strangely quiet after the fiancée had been escorted away, her fate sealed by the Vampire King's unwavering resolve. Maid stood in the center of the grand hall, her heart still pounding with adrenaline from the confrontation. The weight of the moment hung in the air, but there was no time to savor the victory. The Vampire King had acted decisively, but the real challenge was yet to come. Maid glanced toward the door where the Vampire King had left moments earlier. He had returned to his chambers to finalize his plans, but she knew the storm wasn't over. The fiancé's threats still loomed, and the kingdom would soon feel the ripple effects of her betrayal. Maid exhaled slowly and walked toward the quiet room where the girl lay. She was still sleeping, her breaths deep and even. Maid could hardly believe that the young girl, the Vampire King's daughter, had been buried alive only hours ago. She had been nothing but a child, caught in a game of power and control. But now she was safe, and Maid would make sure it stayed that way. Maid's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned to face it, her nerves on edge. The door creaked open, and the general stepped inside, his expression grim. "The fiancée is gone," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "But her allies remain. They won't be happy with what's happened here." Maid nodded, her eyes darkening with concern. "I know, but the Vampire King is prepared. He will stop them, won't he?" The general stepped further into the room, his eyes flicking toward the girl, still asleep in the bed. "He will, but it won't be easy. We're not dealing with just anyone. The fiancé's supporters are powerful, and they'll be out for revenge. They won't rest until they have the Vampire King's throne." Maid felt a wave of dread wash over her. She had hoped that with the fiancé's removal, things might settle down, but she knew better. Power, especially in the vampire world, was never relinquished without a fight. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice tense with anxiety. The general met her gaze, his face hardening with determination. "We wait, but we also prepare. The Vampire King is not just any ruler. He has enemies who will do anything to see him fall. We can't underestimate them." Maid bit her lip, but she nodded in agreement. "What about the girl? What will happen to her?" The general's eyes softened for a moment as he looked at the young girl lying in the bed. "She is safe, for now, but we need to move her to a more secure location. The mansion is too exposed, and the fiancé's people will be watching closely." Maid's heart clenched at the thought of moving the girl again, but she understood. "Where will we take her?" she asked quietly. The general hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low voice. "To the old fortress. It's hidden deep in the mountains, far from here. Only a few trusted allies know of it. We can keep her there, away from the prying eyes of those who would do her harm." Maid felt a surge of relief at the thought of a safe place for the girl. "How long will we stay there?" she asked, looking up at the general. He shook his head, his expression unreadable. "I don't know. It depends on what happens next. But the Vampire King's enemies are ruthless. We can't afford to make any mistakes." Maid turned back to look at the girl, who was still sleeping soundly. The peace in her face was a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around them. Maid had promised to protect her, and she would keep that promise, no matter what it took. "I'll stay with her," Maid said firmly. "I won't let anything happen to her." The general gave her a brief nod of approval, but his face was still drawn with worry. "Good. We'll move her as soon as possible. Keep an eye out for any signs of danger. The fiancé's network is extensive, and we need to be prepared for anything. As the general left the room, Maid felt a sudden chill sweep over her. She knew what was at stake now. If the Vampire King's enemies caught wind of where they were, they would stop at nothing to take the girl. She had to keep her hidden at all costs. Maid sat beside the bed, her mind racing with the plan ahead. There was no turning back now. The stakes had never been higher. The Vampire Kingdom was a dangerous world, filled with power struggles and deceit, and Maid had been thrust into the heart of it all. But she had a mission now, a duty to protect the young girl who had been betrayed by the very people meant to care for her. No matter what dangers lay ahead, Maid would not fail her. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Maid and the general made the necessary preparations for the move, securing the girl and ensuring that every possible safety measure was taken. But the closer they got to the fortress, the more tense the air became. There were whispers in the shadows, rumors of rebellion stirring. The fiancé's allies were plotting something. Maid could feel it. It wasn't over. The storm was far from done, and the real battle was only just beginning. The journey to the old fortress was long and grueling, but every step they took seemed to increase the sense of urgency that had gripped Maid since the confrontation in the mansion. With each passing day, the risk of discovery grew. The mansion was no longer safe, and neither was the girl. Her presence, her very survival, had become a symbol of resistance, and there were those who would stop at nothing to snuff out that hope. Maid's heart weighed heavily as she kept a watchful eye on the girl, who was still recovering from the trauma of being buried alive. The girl's pale face seemed to be regaining some color, but Maid knew that this would be no easy road to recovery. The mental scars would take longer to heal, and there was always the looming threat of the fiancé's supporters, powerful enemies who would not let this betrayal go unpunished. As they approached the fortress, a sense of foreboding settled in. The air around them felt colder, the trees more twisted, as if nature itself was aware of the danger lurking nearby. Maid couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, but saw nothing. Still, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. "We're almost there," the general said, his voice low and strained. He, too, seemed tense, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Stay alert. No one knows this place better than the fiancé's spies. If they're going to make a move, it will be soon." Maid nodded, her grip tightening on the girl's hand. She was no stranger to danger now. But this felt different. The girl's safety was her responsibility, and Maid would do whatever it took to protect her. They reached the fortress as night fell, the massive stone walls looming in front of them, covered in creeping ivy. The gates were heavy and ancient, but they creaked open as soon as the general approached, his presence recognized by those inside. The guards ushered them in quickly, their eyes filled with suspicion and worry. Maid noticed the difference in the atmosphere as they entered the fortress. This place was a refuge, a sanctuary of sorts, but it also held an undeniable sense of isolation. The walls were thick, the air cold and unwelcoming. Still, it was secure. And for now, that was all that mattered. "We'll need to stay here for a while," the general said as he led them through the dark, narrow halls. "I don't trust anyone in the mansion anymore, but we have allies here. They'll help keep us hidden." Maid glanced around at the stone walls, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows. "How long do you think we'll stay?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. The general paused, his face hardening. "As long as we need to. We'll lay low, gather our strength, and wait for the Vampire King's next move." Maid felt a chill run through her at the mention of the Vampire King. She had seen him act decisively, but now the weight of leadership was on him. He was facing enemies from all sides, and his fiancé's betrayal had only made things worse. She didn't know if he was ready for what was coming. They made their way to a small, secure room, where Maid carefully laid the girl on a cot. She tucked the blankets around her, watching as the girl's breathing evened out. Maid stood for a moment, watching her, her heart heavy with the burden of responsibility. She had never expected to be in this situation, but now she was here. She would do whatever it took to keep the girl safe. The door creaked open behind her, and Maid turned quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at her waist. But it was only the general. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now. Maid nodded, though her mind was still racing. "I'm fine. Just worried." The general stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before resting on the girl. We all are, he said quietly. But this is the safest place we can be for now. The fiancé has a network, but she doesn't know this fortress. Not yet. Maid took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. I know, but I can't stop thinking about what's next. The Vampire King. What if he can't stop her? The general's expression darkened. He will, but it's not going to be easy. The fiancé has more power than we realized. We've underestimated her. Maid felt the weight of his words. Then what do we do? Just wait. The general's eyes hardened with determination. We don't just wait. We prepare. We gather what allies we can. When the Vampire King returns, we'll stand with him. Together, we can bring her down. Maid nodded, though a small part of her remained uncertain. She had seen the Vampire King's anger, but there was something about the fiancé's betrayal that seemed to reach deeper than just a personal vendetta. The fiancé's actions had shaken the very foundation of the kingdom. How could they rebuild that trust? As the days passed, Maid and the general kept to their plan. They moved quietly, gathering information, watching for any sign of the fiancé's spies. But nothing came. The tension was suffocating. Then, one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a figure appeared in the distance, moving swiftly toward the fortress. Maid's heart skipped a beat. The general stood at her side, his eyes narrowing as he observed the figure. It's time, he said quietly. Maid's pulse quickened. She didn't know who it was, but she felt the air shift. Someone was coming, and their world was about to change once again. As the figure approached the fortress, Maid's heart raced. She could feel the tension rising, every muscle in her body tense with anticipation. Who was it? A part of her feared it could be an enemy, someone sent by the fiancé to track them down, but another part of her hoped it was someone, anyone, who could help them. The general stood by her side, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon, his body language alert. It's too dark to make out clearly, he muttered. We'll know soon enough. Maid clutched the dagger at her side, her breath shallow, as the figure drew nearer. As the shadows parted and the figure stepped into the light, Maid's heart skipped a beat. It was a woman. She was tall, dressed in dark traveling clothes, with a hood pulled over her head to shield her from the wind. Maid's first instinct was to step forward, but the general held her back with a firm hand. Stay here, he whispered. We don't know who this is yet. The woman stopped just a few feet away, her posture confident but wary, as if she had been trained to be always alert. Maid couldn't shake the feeling that this woman had been through a great deal. I am looking for the Vampire King, the woman said in a low, commanding voice, her gaze locked on the general. I've come to offer my help. The general didn't flinch, but his expression was unreadable. Who are you? He asked bluntly. The woman hesitated for a moment, then lowered her hood, revealing her face. Her features were sharp, but her eyes, dark and intense, betrayed the depth of her experiences. I'm a former ally of the Vampire King, she said quietly. I was sent away under less than favorable circumstances, but I've heard of what's happening. The fiancé. I know what she's capable of. Maid's curiosity flared, but she remained quiet. She could feel the general's caution, but something in the woman's voice struck a chord with her. You were loyal to the king? The general asked, his tone skeptical. How do we know we can trust you? The woman's eyes softened just slightly. I've been loyal to the Vampire King longer than you've been guarding him. I know what the fiancé is plotting, and I know what must be done to stop her. I don't expect you to trust me right away, but trust this. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe she's a threat to all of us. The general stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Maid could see the wheels turning in his mind, weighing the decision. Finally he gave a short nod. You can come in, but if you betray us, I'll make sure you regret it. The woman gave a curt nod in return, and the general led her into the fortress. Maid followed closely behind, her mind racing with 100 questions. Who was this woman, really? How did she know so much? And could she be trusted? Once inside the dimly lit room, the woman lowered her hood again and looked around. This place isn't as secure as it seems, she said, her voice low. But it will do for now. Maid observed her closely. What do you know about the fiancé? She asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. The woman turned to face her. I know that she's ruthless. She won't stop until she has what she wants, and if that means destroying the Vampire King's family, so be it. She's always had a thirst for power, and now she's willing to kill for it. Maid's heart sank. She had feared as much. But we can stop her, right? She asked. The woman gave a faint, grim smile. Yes, but it won't be easy. She's not the only enemy we face. The fiancé has allies, powerful ones. The vampire king might be able to hold his own, but we need to prepare for the worst. Maid's mind swirled with possibilities. They were facing more enemies than she had ever imagined, and each step they took seemed to carry them deeper into a battle that had no clear end. What should we do first? Maid asked, feeling a sense of urgency building in her chest. The woman studied her for a moment, as if weighing her response. We start by gathering information, she said finally. We need to know who stands with the fiancé and who stands with the vampire king. And we need to prepare for an attack, because one is coming. The general nodded in agreement. I'll send out scouts. We can't afford to be caught off guard. Maid felt a spark of hope. Finally, there was a plan. They wouldn't sit here waiting, helpless. They would fight back. But as the woman's words echoed in her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were far worse than they seemed. The fiancé's betrayal had cracked everything open, exposing the raw, bloody truth beneath. The kingdom was on the verge of something terrible, and Maid wasn't sure if they could stop it. We'll move quickly, the woman said, snapping Maid from her thoughts. But I need to ask something of you. Maid raised an eyebrow. What? Trust me, the woman said, her voice steady. We may not have much time, and the vampire king can't fight this alone. We're stronger if we stand together. Maid hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision heavy in her chest. But as she looked at the woman, her determination unwavering, Maid knew that this was their only option. They had to stand together. I trust you, she said quietly. The woman gave a small nod of approval. Good. Then let's make sure we're ready. Maid turned back to the girl, still lying on the cot, her breath steady but her future uncertain. The battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, Maid felt a glimmer of hope. They would fight, and they would win. The days that followed were filled with tension, the air thick with the weight of the looming battle. Maid, along with the general and their newfound ally, prepared for what they knew was coming. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The fiancé's network was vast, and she wasn't going to let this betrayal go unpunished. The girl, though still fragile from the trauma, was their most important asset now. Her survival was a beacon of hope, and that made her a target. They couldn't afford to let their guard down for a second. Inside the fortress, the atmosphere was tense. Guards were on high alert, watching every movement, every shadow. No one knew when or where the fiancé's supporters might strike. Maid spent her time close to the girl, watching over her as she rested, trying to keep her safe from the dangers outside. But even as she did so, Maid couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The woman who had joined them was a mystery, but there was something about her that commanded respect. She had been an ally of the vampire king in the past, but her departure had been shrouded in secrecy. Maid trusted her for now, but she couldn't help wondering what she wasn't saying. The general, too, was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He was ready for battle, his every move calculated, prepared for whatever came next. Still, as the days passed, Maid couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread in the pit of her stomach. She had seen the power that the fiancé wielded, and the vampire king's enemies were not to be underestimated. The hour of reckoning was drawing near. Late one evening, the general returned to the fortress, his face grim, his eyes sharp with urgency. Maid was waiting in the main hall, her mind racing with questions. As he approached, she could see the weight of the information he carried. What's happening? She asked, her voice tight with anticipation. The general stopped in front of her, his expression unreadable. They're moving, he said quietly. The fiancé's supporters. They know we're here. They'll strike soon. Maid's heart sank. How do we prepare? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The general's eyes flicked to the side, his expression hardening. We don't have much time, he said. We fight back. We need to get the girl to safety first. Then, we make sure they understand that we're not going down without a fight. Maid nodded, determination flooding through her. Then let's do it. The general gave a brief nod, his face set in a determined frown. Get ready. They'll be here any minute. The sound of footsteps echoed through the stone hallways as the general gathered the guards, preparing them for the imminent attack. Maid watched, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was the moment when everything would either be lost or won. As she turned to check on the girl one last time, she was interrupted by the woman who had joined their cause. She stood at the doorway, her face calm but determined. "We need to move her," the woman said quietly. "Now." Maid turned to the general, who gave her a sharp nod. The girl's safety was their first priority, and with the attack imminent, there was no more time to waste. Maid moved quickly, gathering the girl in her arms and following the general and the woman as they made their way through the dark, winding corridors of the fortress. The air was thick with tension, the sound of distant footsteps growing louder. They had no illusions about the danger they were in. Every corner, every shadow could hide an enemy. The fortress was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield. The woman led them through a narrow passageway that Maid hadn't seen before. It was hidden away, tucked behind a series of old, crumbling walls. "This way," the woman instructed, her voice low. "The safe house is just beyond this door." Maid followed closely behind, her mind racing. She couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something wasn't right. As they reached the door, the woman turned to her, her expression serious. "Once we're inside, you stay with the girl," she said firmly. "Don't leave, no matter what happens." Maid nodded, her hand tightening around the girl. "I won't leave her." With a deep breath, the woman pushed open the door, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It was simple, but it was secure. Maid moved quickly, setting the girl down on the bed and checking on her one last time. The girl was still asleep, her chest rising and falling with each steady breath. Maid stood by her side, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. But as the seconds ticked by, Maid couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The attack was coming. It was just a matter of time. The woman stood by the door, her hand on the handle, her eyes flicking toward Maid. "Stay here," she said again, her voice cold with resolve. "I'll make sure the others are ready." Maid nodded, her eyes locked on the woman. She trusted her, but even so, the sense of impending danger was too strong to ignore. The Fiancée supporters were coming, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. As the door closed behind the woman, Maid stood in the small room, her heart pounding in her chest. The wait felt endless, each second stretching longer than the last. She had no idea what was happening outside, but she knew one thing for sure: the final battle was upon them. They had made their stand. Now they would see if it was enough. The tension in the air had thickened into something tangible. Maid's mind was racing as she sat beside the girl, the silence in the room suffocating. Outside, she knew the fortress was bracing for impact. The Fiancée supporters were closing in, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim what they saw as theirs. Maid had done everything she could to keep the girl safe, but now the final test was upon them. The woman who had joined them, once an ally of the Vampire King, had gone to rally their forces, leaving Maid and the girl in this small, secure room. It was as safe as it could get, but the ominous weight of the situation pressed heavily on her. Every sound, every creak of the old wood, felt like it could be the start of an assault. The girl was still resting, but Maid knew the stakes. Her survival meant everything. As the minutes dragged on, Maid could feel her nerves fraying. She had prepared for the worst, but hoped for the best. Every muscle in her body was on high alert, her senses stretched thin, waiting for any sign of danger. It felt like an eternity before the door opened once again, and the general entered. His face was drawn, eyes scanning the room before they settled on Maid. "They're here," he said, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "We have to move. Now." Maid's heart leapt in her chest. "What do you mean? Are we under attack?" The general's expression was grim. "Yes. They've breached the outer defenses. The Fiancée's men are inside the fortress. We need to get the girl out before they reach her." Maid quickly rose from the cot, her hands trembling as she reached for the girl. The moment was here. Everything they had been preparing for was coming to a head. "Where are we going?" Maid asked, her voice tight. The general didn't answer immediately, but motioned for her to follow him. Through the escape tunnels, they run beneath the fortress and lead to a safe location. Maid nodded, her mind reeling. She had no choice but to trust the general. The Fiancée supporters were closing in, and the only chance they had was to get out before they were surrounded. She picked up the girl gently, her arms aching with the weight, but she couldn't afford to hesitate. Every second counted. The general led the way, moving swiftly through the darkened halls. The fortress, which had once seemed like a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, the walls closing in as the enemy approached. Maid kept her eyes on the girl, her face still peaceful, unaware of the storm that was brewing just outside the room. As they approached a hidden door, the general paused, looking over his shoulder. "Stay close," he warned. "There's no telling how many are inside. They'll be hunting for us." Maid's breath caught in her throat, but she nodded. They couldn't afford to be caught. The general pushed open the door, revealing a narrow passageway. The air inside was cool, the stone walls damp with the weight of time. The tunnel was dark, the only sound the soft scuff of their feet on the rough ground. "This way," the general murmured, leading them down the narrow path. Maid followed closely behind, her mind focused on one thing, getting the girl to safety. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Maid couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every footstep, every sound in the darkness made her heart race. She had to stay calm. She had to stay focused. The girl's life depended on it. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel began to open up, and the general slowed. "We're almost there," he said, his voice low but firm. Maid could hear the faint sound of rushing water ahead, the signal that they were nearing the underground exit. But as they reached the end of the tunnel, they were met with an unexpected sight. A figure stood at the entrance, blocking their way. Maid's heart skipped a beat as she saw who it was. The woman who had joined their cause, the one who had claimed to be an ally, was standing in their path. "You shouldn't have come this far," the woman said, her voice icy, her eyes filled with an unfamiliar hardness. Maid's stomach sank. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and anger. The woman's lips curled into a cold smile. "I was sent to make sure the Vampire King's daughter doesn't leave this fortress. You've been a fool to think you could hide her from us." The general stepped forward, his hand on the sword at his side. "You're with them," he said, his voice dark with realization. "You were playing us all along." The woman's smile grew wider, but there was no humor in it. "Did you really think I would help you?" "No. I've always been loyal to the fiancé. And now, the Vampire King's daughter will be mine." Maid's mind raced. This was a betrayal, a deep one, and they had walked right into it. The woman wasn't an ally at all. She was the enemy. The general unsheathed his sword, stepping between Maid and the woman. "You won't get away with this," the general snarled, his voice filled with cold fury. Maid stepped forward, clutching the girl to her chest. "We're leaving," she said, her voice hard. "You won't stop us." The woman's eyes narrowed, and her expression darkened. "You think you can just walk away? You're out of your depth, little maid. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The general raised his sword, ready to strike, but the woman held up a hand, stopping him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. You won't survive what's coming." Maid stood her ground, her resolve as firm as steel. "We'll take our chances." The woman's smile faded as she stepped back, her hand moving to the dagger at her belt. The final confrontation was inevitable now, and Maid knew there was no way out except through victory. The fight for the girl's life, and for the future of the Vampire King's kingdom, was about to begin. The tension in the air was almost unbearable as Maid and the general faced the woman who had betrayed them. The woman's cold smile faded into a sneer, her eyes full of malice as she stepped forward, drawing her dagger with a swift motion. "You think you can escape?" she hissed, her voice thick with venom. "You have no idea what you're up against. The fiancé will reclaim everything, and you will all be nothing but obstacles in her way." Maid's heart raced as she tightened her grip on the girl in her arms. There was no way they could go back now. The only choice was to fight. The general stood in front of them, sword drawn and poised for battle. "We won't let you harm her," he said, his voice cold and filled with authority. "Not now, not ever." The woman's laugh was sharp and mocking. "You're outnumbered, and your time is running out. The fiancé's forces are already on their way here. You can't hide forever." Maid's eyes darted between the woman and the door, knowing that the only chance they had was to push forward. She had to protect the girl at all costs. "We don't need to hide," Maid said, her voice steady despite the fear swirling inside her. "We'll face this head-on." Without warning, the woman lunged, her dagger aimed directly at the general. He parried with his sword, the clash of metal ringing through the air. Maid watched, her heart in her throat, as the two combatants exchanged blows. The general's movements were swift, precise, but the woman was relentless, her anger fueling every strike. Maid didn't have time to think. The girl in her arms was too precious to risk, too fragile to be caught in the chaos of the battle. She quickly stepped back, inching toward the exit of the room, her mind working desperately to find a way out. The woman's focus remained on the general, but Maid knew that if she didn't act soon, it would all be over. Her eyes flicked to the nearby window. It was their only way out. With a surge of determination, Maid ran toward the window, her legs moving faster than she thought possible. As she reached it, she threw open the shutters, taking one last glance at the general, who was still locked in battle with the woman. "We can't stay here," Maid whispered urgently to the girl. "We need to move. Now." The girl stirred slightly in her arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked confused, but her gaze quickly locked on Maid, sensing the urgency. Without hesitation, Maid leaped out of the window, landing lightly on the soft earth below. The cold night air hit her immediately, but she didn't have time to notice it. She had to get as far away as possible. She looked back toward the fortress, watching as the shadows seemed to grow darker, the battle raging on inside. She had made the right choice. There was no turning back now. The general had to hold off the woman long enough for them to escape. As Maid hurried through the grounds, the girl in her arms growing heavier with each step, she heard the distant sound of horses. The fiancé's men were closing in. Maid's heart pounded as she quickened her pace. She could feel the presence of danger at her back, but she refused to look. She couldn't afford to stop now. She had to keep going. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but it was their only chance. She had no plan beyond survival, no plan except to keep the girl safe. She didn't know where they would go, but she knew they couldn't stay in the open. As the trees closed in around them, Maid's instincts kicked in. She darted off the path and into the woods, hoping to lose their pursuers. She didn't dare stop to catch her breath. Every step felt like a battle. The girl, still weak from the ordeal she had endured, rested her head against Maid's shoulder, trusting her completely. Maid felt her heart tighten with the weight of responsibility. They had to survive this. The girl had to survive. The sounds of horses grew louder, and Maid pushed herself harder, her legs burning with exhaustion. She couldn't stop. Not now. She was running on pure adrenaline. She had no idea where they were headed, but it didn't matter. The night was their ally, and the darkness would hide them for now. As the moon rose high in the sky, casting an eerie light over the land, Maid's mind flashed back to the fortress, the place that had once been their refuge, now compromised by betrayal. She had trusted the woman, had believed her when she said she was an ally, but now Maid knew the truth. They had been deceived. The woman had been playing both sides from the beginning, and Maid had walked right into her trap. The cold reality of their situation hit her like a wave. The fiancé's forces were closing in, and they had no time to waste. They needed help. They needed an ally who could stand against the fiancée and her supporters. But where could they find such an ally? The Vampire King's enemies were everywhere. Maid's thoughts were interrupted as she heard the rustle of leaves behind her. Her heart skipped a beat. Had they been found? She turned sharply, preparing to face whatever danger awaited them. But to her relief, it was the general. He appeared from the shadows, breathing heavily but unscathed. "We have to move quickly," he said, his voice urgent. "They're right behind us." Maid nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we run," she said. "We don't stop until we're safe." The general gave her a sharp nod, and together, they ran deeper into the woods, leaving the chaos of the fortress behind. The future was uncertain, but for now, they were alive. And as long as they were alive, there was still hope. They would find a way to defeat the fiancée. Together, they would bring justice for the Vampire King's daughter.